Welcome back, everyone. Tell me, did you go and grab something to drink during the break or a snack to eat? And how many of you are watching this together? So was there a mad dash for getting something to drink? And did you have to share it? Did you have to compete for it? Well, that is what is happening in natural environments as well. Resources are fought over, and that is what we talk about by competition. So when we look at competition, we see that a resource, or in your instance, maybe in everyday language, a prize is limited. Limited resources mean that individuals have to compete. So just as you might be running a race and you're competing for first prize as far as being the winner of the race is concerned, we need to think of resources in an environment as prizes, things that individuals are going to compete for. Now, think back over our previous lessons. What kind of resources do you think would automatically spring to mind that are going to spark off some ideas of competition? Just as you and your friends might compete over a cold drink or a sandwich, so organisms in a natural environment are going to compete over food, water. Can you think of other things you compete against each other for? Well, let's look at it in terms of natural environments and populations, and let's see how competition impacts on these interactions. In a community, now straight away I want to stop there and say we're talking not only about populations now, one population, but we're talking about different populations that are going to be interacting with each other. So therefore, we're talking about a community. And we're going to see organisms compete for the same resources. So maybe they're competing for food or water, or in the case of a population, they could be competing for mates, individuals of the same species competing for mates. Organisms are going to be competing for nesting sites or breeding sites. These are going to be well-sheltered areas in the ecosystem that are conducive either for laying eggs or for bringing up young or for birthing young. So those sites, those spaces in the environment are competed for. Territory is something else that's important. In many animal species, we're going to see members of the population competing for a particular space or a territory, and they're going to defend that territory. They're going to spend a lot of energy advertising, this is my territory. Any female organism found in this territory is mine, or any food found in this territory is mine. So territories are important to a lot of populations. These are all examples of resources that can be competed for. So if you have a look at these pictures, and we will get back to them again a little later, look and see, what do you think is being competed for? What in each of these situations are the animals competing for? As I said, I'll come back and we'll talk about it, but predict those ideas of what is being competed for in those pictures right now. Now, there are two different kinds of competition that exist, and we need to be able to distinguish between the two, and the two terms sound very similar. They are interspecific competition and intraspecific competition. So there's, once again, the English language making your life sciences life a lot more difficult. When we talk about interspecific competition, we're talking about different species. There's species 1, here's species 2. Two different species competing for the same resource. So if you think about a water hole in a game park, that is the resource. Water is being competed for. Water is our contested resource. And it's going to be different species that are competing for the same body of water. That is what we call interspecific competition. But there's another kind of competition. We could have members of the same species maybe competing for mates. And in this case, it's called intraspecific competition. So that's within one species. And so we're going to see that same species competing is going to be within a population, because a population consists of organisms of the same species. When we're talking about interspecific competition, we're talking about competition in the community as a whole, because we've got to have at least two different populations or two different species at the very least competing for that same resource. All right? So although the terms sound very similar, we need to think about inter is between different populations and intra is within one population. In other words, one species is involved in the competition alone. Now, have a look at this photograph. Here we've got two gemsbok or oryxes, and they appear to be having a conflict. What kind of competition is illustrated here? Where they are both clearly from the same species, what would we call this? Would we call it interspecific competition, or would we call it intraspecific competition? Well, remember, clearly they're both from the same species, so we're going to call it intraspecific competition, competition within one species. Now, although the question didn't ask you, what do you think those two gemsboks could be in competition or in conflict over? Well, it could be that they're fighting for space. It could be that they're fighting for mates. So territory or mates, unless we could see the bigger picture, we wouldn't be able to work out precisely what they're fighting over, but they certainly are in competition. Now, the famous Paramecium competition investigation showed us two different Paramecium species. If you grew Paramecium aurelia all by itself in a little water source, completely on its own, we would see this kind of very normal logistic growth. Likewise, if you took the other species, Paramecium caudatum, and you grew it separately all by itself, we'd see a very similar growth curve. But when the two species were grown together, something very interesting happened. We saw that both species started growing at more or less the same rate, but then look what happened to poor Paramecium caudatum. Paramecium aurelia was able to outcompete Paramecium caudatum. Right? So the word outcompete means that one population is able to survive far better in this conflict situation than the other. And that is something typical of interspecific competition. Now, moving on to specialization. Specialization is very closely linked to competition. So when we talk about specialization, we're talking about competing for the same resource, and we need to introduce a new term, ecological niche. Now, what is a niche? Well, a niche is the organism's habitat, where it lives, as well as the role that it plays in the environment. So different species can live together in a community as long as they have slightly different niches. So let's have a look at this example of lions and leopards. They are both apex predators. They both hunt and catch similar kinds of prey species. So how are they both able to compete in a particular ecosystem when they are using the same prey species? Well, they'll have different behaviors. They will behave and specialize in different ways. They might capture their prey at different times. We know that leopards tend to hunt at night, and leopards haul their prey up trees and store it in a kind of pantry up in a tree, whereas lions are going to hunt as prides or groups. Leopards tend to hunt as solitary individuals. The lions will hunt and they will all eat on the ground. So we see that although they're living in the same habitat, they have different niches, and this allows them to occupy the same space. Another example, we've got a giraffe, kudu, and a little impala. They all eat the leaves off the same tree. So we could see that this is going to result in competition. But competition is avoided because they undergo specialization. And here we can see clearly that they're eating at different levels. And so they're exploiting different niches. We've looked at predation, competition, and specialization. What remains is for us to focus on symbiosis. We've looked at a number of interactions in this lesson. We've looked at predation, we've looked at competition, and remember that competition and specialization are linked, and our focus now is to move on to symbiosis. Now, we need to clarify what this term symbiosis means in terms of life sciences, because like so many terms in life sciences, it has a general everyday meaning as well as a very specific scientific meaning. So if you talk about there's a good symbiosis going on in our class or in our school, it means that everyone's helping each other. And if you have a look at this little picture, there's a sense of community and belonging, and everyone is helpful to each other. Now that's what we mean about symbiosis in a very general situation or context. In life sciences, it has a very specific meaning. Symbiosis is a close interaction. When we talk about close, sometimes it can be so close that one of the organisms is living right inside the other organism. That's how close this interaction is going to be. So it's a close interaction, and here is something very important that is part of the life sciences definition that's not part of our everyday understanding of symbiosis. In life sciences, symbiosis is a very close relationship between two different species. So we're not talking about humans helping each other out and living symbiotically together. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about two members of different species that have evolved an extremely close living arrangement. And another important factor is that they're not only living in close contact with each other, but sometimes they can't live without each other. That's how close this symbiotic relationship is. Now, there are three kinds of symbiosis that you are going to be learning about: mutualism, parasitism, and commensalism. So we're going to focus on each of these kinds of relationships in turn, looking at some examples. So I hope you've got your pen and paper ready, because let's start working our way through these different kinds of symbiotic relationships. The first one that we're going to meet is mutualism. Now, I like to think of mutualism as a thumbs up kind of relationship. We've got two different organisms, two different species, and both of them are thumbs up, which means that in mutualism, both organisms are benefiting. That's why we say it's thumbs up, thumbs up. So when we look at a mutualistic example, we can think of an organism that we recognize as lichen. And although it looks like lichen is one organism, in fact, it's made up of fungi living in this close relationship with algae. And it forms a structure called lichen. And both benefit. So it's thumbs up for the fungus, thumbs up for the alga. How do each benefit? Well, the alga is a photosynthetic organism. So it is going to make food from sunlight. The fungus is going to have hyphae that penetrate down into a substrate to hold on and to absorb water from that substrate. So the alga is thumbs up benefiting because it's got an attachment onto substrate and it's getting water. The fungus is a thumbs up because it's getting organic food from the alga that's photosynthesizing. And in that way, both organisms are benefiting, so we call this mutualism. But symbiosis isn't always as happy as mutualism. In humans, there are certain harmless strains of a bacterium called Escherichia coli, which you don't have to remember. You can just simply call it E. coli. And E. coli lives inside your large intestine. Right now, inside your intestine, Escherichia coli is living. But it's not a bad living arrangement that the two of you have, because E. coli is going to help to produce a substance called vitamin K that you need for your blood to clot. And it's going to help you digest your food. And in return, what have you got? The bacteria are in a lovely, dark, warm, protected environment, and they are simply swimming around in food inside your intestine. So there we go. That is a mutualistic thumbs up kind of relationship. But I warned you, not all symbiotic relationships are thumbs up, thumbs up. So welcome to parasitism. Parasitism is a thumbs up, thumbs down kind of relationship. We have one organism benefiting, that is our parasite, and one organism, the host, That is the organism that is being harmed. So let's think of parasites. Lice, for example, that might be living inside your hair. They are deriving food and a secure place to breed. You, on the other hand, are being irritated, suffering from blood loss and itches. So for you, it's thumbs down. But for the lice, oh yeah, it's thumbs up all the way. The lice are really benefiting. And these are some other examples of protystin parasites. Trypanosomes, which cause sleeping sickness, Plasmodium, that causes malaria, entamoeba, that causes dysentery. In each case, it's the parasite thumbs up and the poor person who's sitting with this infectious disease thumbs down. So there we go, some examples of parasitism. And when we come back after the break, we will be focusing on other forms of symbiosis that we can also talk about and see whether they're thumbs up or thumbs down. See you after the break.